All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thomas Montgomery here. It is a beautiful Wednesday morning, April 17th, 2024. We get together most weekday mornings at this time, 8 o'clock Central, talk about strategies, tips, techniques, share success stories, support each of you. And again, we will not have a daily Zoom Thursday, the 18th, or Friday, the 19th. We'll resume on Monday. But today we have a very important topic. So we're going to teach a financial literacy topic in terms of vocabulary. Now, what I ask you to do is when you're out educating others, don't come off as arrogant or better than other people, because we're all equal, right? None of us are better than others. But what is true, you know a lot of things that other people don't know. You know how any business can become fundable. You know how any business can go through a four-phase process and get 250,000 or more. Those are all facts. But people typically don't care about what you know. They want, especially adult learners, they want to know what's relevant to them. So today we're going to talk about sources and uses of funds. Now note, this is something that we take care of with client implementation. So my goal today isn't to introduce this or reiterate it to you saying, here, you need to go do something with it. I just want you to understand what it takes to create a fundable business. And this is another layer in the process that we handle for you. Because as a branch office, you're going out to the marketplace, you're doing three things, aren't you? Right? You're generating leads, you're educating leads, and then you're enrolling leads. In terms of the education, the second of the three, most of you are using this four-phase document. You can edit it with your own call to action at the bottom, but this works really well. Because why? It describes what we do. It describes approximately the order in which we do it, going through the four phases. And as we've discussed on other trainings, it positions you to be able to really reiterate to the participant or prospective participant the value that they receive each step of the way. That's not our conversation today, so I don't want to burden you with that now. But today we're going to talk about the sources and uses of funds. So again, I'll say this not sarcastically, but again, you know a lot of things that other people don't know. So why do I bring that up? There are almost an infinite number of people that would like a big pile of money to start or grow a business. People that already have a business, people thinking about starting a business, and so forth. However, you and I are naive. Well, no, you and I are not naive. Our clients would be naive to think that they can sign up with you and we go from the tip of the arrow, they sign up with you, and then all of a sudden, bam, they get a big pile of money. I mean, just the armored truck just backs up and starts unloading pallets of money, right? That doesn't happen. We need to create a fundable business. Well, specific to today's discussion is on this pile of money, we're going to work with, meaning our implementation team, not your burden. We're going to work with the implementation team to determine what are the uses of funds. And there's different types of lenders, and different lenders have different underwriting criteria and requirements. So there's no generalized answer. But in general, you don't just go to the lender and say, hey, I want $1 million and give no explanation. They're typically going to want to know, well, what are you going to use it for? Now, from our perspective as your implementation team, as your back office, we need to know what they're going to use it for, because it will impact where we go for funding and how we need to get them prepped. So the uses of funds, in summary, is how the money is going to be spent, and the sources of funds is where the money is going to come from. But we'll dig a little deeper. So the question here is, what is a sources and uses of funds? Now, typically this is in a business plan. If a client enrolls into the Access to Capital program, we actually build out a full business plan with all those different elements, a SWOT analysis and competitive analysis and all that. Here we're just, for the startup program, we're doing the specific elements needed to get the client from the tip of the arrow here, enrollment, over here to get funding. And so instead of bogging down the system and doing a full business plan, so we don't do that, what we do is create a sources and uses of funds. So reading from my notepad here, a sources and uses of funds section is a summary of how much money will be required for startup expenses and operating capital and where you expect that money to come from. So let's break this down. I'll create some more space so maybe it's just really clear. So we have uses of funds or use of funds and source or sources of funds. Let's talk about each separately. Again, one more time, we do this with the client, so it's not your burden, but I don't want you to be surprised that if you enroll a client, which you all should be, of course, enrolling clients every day, that they say, hey, they were working with us on the use of funds. What's all that about? Well, of course, we have to identify what is it that we want the funding for. It can't just be, oh, I'll figure it out later. So we're going to break down uses of funds really into two categories. I think this will make a lot of sense to you. So startup cost versus working capital. So startup cost is essentially, let's add a little note, what it takes to get the business started. Now, some of the clients may come to you and they already have a business that started, so they don't have any startup costs because that's already happened. I respect that. But in general, if a client's coming to us from a clean slate, especially if we're creating a new business entity for them, so it's a brand new start, then what do we need to get this business started? So that could be equipment, maybe it's real estate, maybe it's payroll, maybe it's marketing, maybe it's inventory. Every once in a while, and I say this with a chuckle, every once in a while I'll have a client when I'm working with them and they'll say, well, I don't know. Why don't you tell me? And I'm like, client, I don't know your business. You're the CEO of your business. You know your industry. You've come to us to get funding, to get lots of funding. We probably need to figure out what the hell you're going to do and what you need the money for, right? So it's okay if the client doesn't know day one. It's not like embarrassing them, but we need to vet through that, right? Because what we don't do is just go say, oh, we wouldn't want $1 million. I'll tell you, lender, later. We need to identify what we're going to use it for. So startup cost is what it takes to get started, and then working capital is ongoing funds. So again, we could break this down. What are the three primary categories of use of funds? And not everyone has all of these three, and that's okay. But in general, there would be real estate expenditures. Are there real estate? Are we going to spend money on purchasing, acquiring real estate? If not, that's okay. But if so, then that deserves special attention. Wouldn't you agree? The second would be business equipment. And I know that may not sound right to you, but that also includes vehicles. So we bought our business Porsche under the EIN name a couple months ago. Drove it to work this morning, so that's real. We got this Huracan last Thursday. Not real happy with the Huracan. Got a nail in the tire. So yesterday, well, no, 2 days ago, got the low pressure tire reading in the driver's rear, the wheel you can't see, or maybe just the shadow. So of course, at $600 later, we've replaced the tire because you don't patch a tire on an exotic car, supercar. But regardless, so we need to know categories of where they want to spend money. If there's real estate, let's nail that down. If there's business equipment and or vehicles, let's nail that down. And then third would be what we'll call just general working capital, kind of general use. Now, again, even if it's going to go into that working capital category, we're still going to want to identify, how much is for payroll, how much is for marketing, and so forth, because obviously the client needs to know, because let's work backwards. We'll take Larry's on the call here, one of our top branches. So if Larry has a client and Larry asks the client, well, how much funding do you want? And the client just says, well, I want $1 million. Hopefully, Larry's client just didn't pull that number out of an orifice, right? It was a cumulative list, because what we need the stack of money for is for our startup cost and our working capital. So in other words, there should be a list. Here's an analogy. You and I go to Walmart or Kroger's or any grocery store. Well, how much money do we need to check out? It depends upon what we put in our shopping cart, right? So the cumulative amount of everything that we're buying is how much we need to check out. This over here should be the cumulative amount of all of the uses of funds. Make sense? So it's not real complicated. We send them an email. They have a template to follow. We work with them. So it's not complicated. This isn't like rocket science, but I just want you to understand what the uses of funds are. So before I get to the sources of funds, which is kind of the other side of the equation, are there any questions on the use, or we'll call it uses of funds? We have a big group today. Thank you everyone for joining. Any questions on that? So it's not like we're looking for some right answer or wrong answer. The client either knows or needs to figure out. We're not operational consultants, so we're not going to figure out which computer they should buy, which laptop, for example, or which desks. That's not our role. But ultimately, we need the client to come up with a use of funds. Now, the level of specificity, if they're going to buy a Dell laptop versus an Apple laptop, that's kind of irrelevant in general. But certainly real estate needs to be specifically identified, and any material expenditures on business equipment and vehicles needs to be identified. So for example, when we bought the Huracan last week, you don't get business funding for some car, you get business funding for a car. You don't get business funding for some real estate, you get business funding for specific real estate, right? Because these are going to typically be pledged as collateral, right? Think about just a home as a consumer. If you buy a house and you get a mortgage on it, there's a lien against the deed. So if you don't pay for the mortgage, they'll repossess the home. If you get a vehicle and you don't pay the car, there's a lien against the title of the car, you don't pay for it, and then they'll repossess it. So typically, for these larger assets, there's specific liens against the specific assets. Now, sometimes we can work around that. That's slight adjunct, but let's take Dr. Davis. Dr. Davis brought us a client, real client, her name is Charlotte. Charlotte wants to buy real estate, but she does not want to have a lien against the real estate. She wants to own it unencumbered, free and clear. So that's fine. So what we're doing with Charlotte is getting her real estate and using general use funding for it. Katori is asking about monthly leases. So monthly leases are normally going to be a working capital expenditure, even though the expenditure is for real estate. If it's not buying the real estate, it would fall into working capital. Great question, Katori. Thank you. Okay, so are we all good in general? So we need to have, which we do, it's not your burden, for clients that enroll, we need to put together their uses of funds to figure out what they want money for. We handle that. There's categories such as what's it going to take to get the business started? What are we going to need after the business starts? 3 primary categories: real estate, business equipment, including automobiles, and then we'll call it other. Anything that's specifically of these 2, we should identify very specifically, because typically there's going to be a lien against those. Okay, so now we're rolling on to the other side of the equation. Sources of funds. Where's the money going to come from? So let's say that this stack, again, is $1 million. So some of you have made the mistake to think the most that we can get through the program is $250,000. That's not correct. Now, there's some funding sources that have limits, as stated here, but we're not affiliated. We're not required to use certain funding sources, and we can stack funding sources or use multiple. So don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, the most we can get a client is 250,000. That's inaccurate. Okay, sources of funds. Real simple. It's the other side of the equation. Where's the money going to come from? So it could come from typically whatever the owner is going to contribute. In other words, the client. How much are we going to go borrow from lenders? And that could come from different lenders, one or more lenders, SBA, non-SBA, Chapman, whatever. We're not worried about which lenders. We're just talking about how much is going to come from debt versus how much from owner's investment. And then are we going to pursue any from investors, equity money? So in summary, we'll work with each client to put together the uses and sources of funds, and that's an important part of the process of getting ready for funding. I'll hit you with just a couple specific topics, and then we'll wrap it up early today. So what we've started to do is bring the uses and sources of funds a little bit earlier in the process, because there's 4 phases. If you're not very familiar with these 4 phases, you need to be. But even when we start adding trade lines, it's really important for us to know what are the uses of funds. So let's do the Huracan. So we bought this, not bragging. You can go buy one too. We have one of our branches. He was at the Lamborghini dealership yesterday. He sent me pictures of 2 different Lamborghinis he test drove. So getting expensive cars, not a big deal. We can do that through the business under the EIN. But the point is, if we know that the client wants a business vehicle, then if we know that early enough, then that can become one of the trade lines. So the short of it is we're emphasizing the uses and sources of funds a little bit earlier in the process than we had historically, to be able to tailor the trade lines to best meet what the client's needs and wants are. All right, so who has questions, comments, concerns on anything that we discussed today? You got my normal rah-rah speech, right? If you signed up, you're a branch office. You're the CEO of your branch. You need to run it like that. Your branch should be generating at least $100,000 a month. If it's not, we're failing. We need to fix that. There's no reason that each of you can't help at least 8 clients a month, 2 clients a week. There's 3 things you do. You generate leads, you educate leads, and then you enroll leads. If you don't know how to do those things, then we can either improve your capabilities or delegate it, move it off of your plate. We have the client placement program. If you want to outsource all 3 of those, fine. Outsource all 3, and our team will take care of all 3 of those steps for you. But regardless, you own a business, right? You're the branch owner. You're the CEO. We need to run this like a business. This should be $1 million a year gross income business for your business. And so for you. So let us know what we need to do to help you. You should be scheduling one-on-ones in addition to these group sessions. All right, so FaZe has a question. Do we need a down payment for business vehicles? It varies. So I gave everyone a very, very transparent, candid answer, or example. So depending upon the lender, there may be a down payment or not necessary. In many cases, not. So let's use the Huracan as a real example. So the Huracan, when we applied for financing, the most, and a few things goes into how much they'll fund for a vehicle. What's the book value of the vehicle, but also the underwriting of the business and or business owner. But the bottom line is, just to answer FaZe's question very directly, we only got approved. Now, I'm sure you could get approved for more, but we only got approved, and I could send you the documentation if you want, for $190,000. So we work with a credit union very frequently, and they have very liberal underwriting. We can get just about anything financed, but regardless, they offered, they extended $190,000 offer. So what does that mean? Anything above that had to come out of our pocket. So if the price of the vehicle got below that, then there would have been no down payment. As you might expect, this baby was more than $190,000, so there was a down payment. So just keep in mind, for business vehicles, it's not always the way you think about with consumer vehicles. There may be a max loan amount, and if you're below that, you might not need to have any down payment, but it can vary. All right, Katori asks, does the core 250 come from one lender, which would create one payment? Okay, so that's a good point. So I'm going to explain that differently so everyone follows. So clients enroll with you to enroll through your branch in the Startup Business Funding Program. We've got to get away from this 250. So yeah, so is that the max for the Chapman Fund? It is. That's a factual statement, but we're not glued to the Chapman Fund. There's many different sources of capital. This pile of money could be more or less than 250,000 based upon what? Based upon what? What the client needs, their uses of funds. So I'm glad Katori brought it up because it reiterates the point I'm trying to make. This pile can be twice as tall, or 3 times as tall, or 4 times, or 10 times as tall. It's what does the client need, and then we need to build a fundable business that gets approved for that amount. But really, at the core of Katori's question is, does that come from one lender or multiple lenders? It depends. And she's right. In some cases, it may be that for real estate, we have one lender. For business equipment, we might have another. And for working capital, there might be a third. But we'll work with the client on those details and their mitigating circumstances. So at the end of the day, let's go enroll a client, man. That's what you signed up to do, to go help people and make a lot of money. We can't be afraid to make money. If you need help, let me know, but we need to go make money. We need to go enroll clients. 3 things you do: generate leads, educate leads, and enroll leads. If you don't know how to do that, we've got to figure it out or outsource it. So in summary, thanks for joining us. We talked about the sources and uses of funds to get you more familiar with it. Not your responsibility to implement with the client. No Zoom Thursday, Friday. We'll be back on Monday. Let us know what we can do to help you. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.